Hello, hello, good evening. Welcome everyone to the Feminist Futures Institute.
Hello.
My name is Tamika Middleton. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Deputy Director at Women's March, and I am joining you this evening from the land of the Muskogee Creek people, also known as East Point, Georgia. Today is the second of the eight-part web series, Feminist Futures Institute. And we hope that you will continue to join us for the next 6 weeks. And we are very grateful for all of you who are joining us again for the second week. Last week, we met Barbara Smith and Issa Noyola. From the Grimkey sisters to Barbara and her own sister, from the Combahee River Collective to the detention of our trans sisters at our borders, we explored what feminism looks like in practice. And over the next 7 weeks, we'll continue to explore how do we get here and where do we go from here. We'll listen from and we'll learn about everyday women across history who've navigated those waters before, and we'll radically envision where we go from here. And so today, in this session, which is called Our Feminist Roots, we will be anchored by Kate Shapiro, who is a staff member at Women's March, who leads our organizing, our field team, and also Mary Hooks, who is a phenomenal organizer and leader, also here in Atlanta, Georgia, with us. And so we're grateful for them for joining us. And so we'll continue to explore where and how you fit into the stories and teachings that Mary and Kate share with us this evening. Stay tuned. We'll start shortly, and we'll see you all soon.
Hello, everybody. Hi, friends.
Hi, friends.
We're tuning in here from Mary Hooks' front porch, essentially her primary office.
This is true.
And super happy to be here. We're going to start with some intros, talk a little bit about what is feminism, and then tell you a couple stories.
Just a few.
Just a few from our time together.
Enough to put you to sleep.
There we go.
A little bedtime story.
So, Mary Hooks is a 39-year-old Capricorn. She is a rugged organizer. I think
You gotta catch this melanin. But okay.
There you go. Scoot up a little bit. She is currently the field secretary, which means all things organizing, and is a shout out to SNCC at the Movement for Black Lives. And we have been friends and comrades since about 2011 or 2012.
2000. Well, we met initially at the Gemini Gym. I think that was 2010, before you went to Wisconsin.
At least
but we
10
weren't
years.
Homies, but we were like, little white girl with some cool glasses, thicker.
I'm
thicker than a Snicker. Who is this?
I'm introducing you
right
now.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Keep going.
And she was at Song for about 10 years. Is a mommy, is a Black lesbian, and is one of the funniest, most devoted, most fantastic people I know.
Oh, friend.
It's true.
This my friend. Her name Kate Shapiro. And I think that, as Kate explained, we've been homies and friends and comrades for some time. And I must say that Kate is one of the people who I've met who has the smallest hands I've ever seen. Is also...
That's an exaggeration.
Extra ridiculous. So we work really well together.
True.
I think we not afraid to put ourselves out there for the sake of the broader aims. Is a risk taker, is fucking die hard, and one of the best organizers I know, hands down, and has taught me so much. And is an amazing uncle to my 8.5-year-old Porter. But yeah, and also doing big things inside of the Women's March. Shout out to all of the work y'all just did with the marches, saying.
And shout out to y'all who threw down in all the ways this weekend with the rallies for reproductive justice. So, yeah, we could call Angela. So let's just define feminism real briefly here, since we're up inside Feminist Futures, talking about our feminist roots. Yeah. Let's pull out that definition of Bell Hooks's.
Yes.
Can we do that? Will you read that out loud to the people?
Read on. Feminism is a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. This includes political, social, and ideological methods and work. Shout out to Bell Hooks, no relation. And it's also to address dominance as well. And that's also part of the struggle, is to eradicate dominance.
In all of its different forms. So that's one of the reasons why we love that definition from Bell Hooks, is that it grounds us, right, in a critique and an understanding of structural power as it is manifested through patriarchy, but also understanding that we're not going to actually ever be able to eradicate sexist oppression or patriarchy if we're not actually entering other forms of oppression and domination that, of course, include white supremacy, capitalism and economic exploitation, heteronormativity, and all of the other systems that are trying to keep some people down at the expense of others.
Facts.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about our feminist values, and then we're going to tell y'all some stories from our times together.
Tell y'all all our business.
Just a little bit of it. We only have 30 minutes.
Okay.
So when you think about our feminist values, Mary Louise Hooks, also that's her middle name. What are some of the best of our feminist values? When you think about over time, what are some of the best of our feminist values inside of our different feminist traditions?
One of the first things that come to mind for me is redemption, the belief in redemption and transformation, right? That, and I don't know if I need to unpack it, but check it out if you don't know, but redemption and transformation, right? That there is the hope that it exists, but then we also can do work, that we also have to move in a way that also exemplifies that we believe that thing, yeah? So we believe that, the conditions of our lives can be transformed. We believe that the conditions in our communities can be transformed, that we can create transformative processes, that we can, redeem the soul of humanity, you know what I mean? Which is a tall fucking order, but I believe it to be so. I
mean, I would also add the transformation of ourselves in the process.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
oh,
that
yeah.
It's not just out there.
Yeah.
Change in the systems and the structures and the rules,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
knowing that we enter movement also to be changed. Yeah. Knowing that none of us are growing, that none of us are done growing, no matter what our age or level of experience is. We still have things to offer, and things to gain. I think one of the other things that comes up for me is thinking about interdependence and relationship, and our ability to actually figure out how do we relate to others, knowing that none of us made ourselves. Yeah. None of us are going to be able to get out of any of these holes we've dug ourselves into or have been put into alone, and figuring out how we can actually rebuild the fabric in our society across different lines of difference that are also set up to keep us apart. Yeah. You got one or two more? We'll keep going.
I think that there's also a value in that I'm holding around, it's kind of all kind of meshed up a little bit, but around principled struggle and no investigation, no right to speak. And some of the ways in which, because of all of those things, because we got to build relationships, because we got difference, because of blah, 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 that we all have internalized I can cuss. I'm cussing on this. You invite me.
You already have. Come on.
But we've all drank the shits that that sometimes it also shows up in real fucked up ways in how we be with each other and how we actually build that fabric. And so part of that is grounding ourselves in principle struggle. Shout out to Tanya Lee, who gave us some beautiful framing around what principled struggle is. And I'm not going to verbatim quote, but I think it's important for folks to know it. And perhaps, look, you going to drop it in there?
I'm going to write her name down.
Yeah, and Tanya Lee.
I don't know how to write into the chat, actually.
Okay, we'll work on that. Okay. But essentially, it's about the ways in which we struggle for the sake of unity. We don't struggle to be right. We struggle for the sake of unity. That we have to be measured and disciplined about the ways, the issues we bring into a space. What is for the space to hold versus a one-on-one, or versus, with a smaller group of people. There's a few, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna keep us moving. And then just this thing around no investigation or right to speak, right? And so unfortunately, we live in a time where, anything that's happening inside of organizations and movement, the front page news becomes social media, instead of the first, instinct or draw is to come closer together, to actually let's sit and struggle with it, right? And then you get the peanut gallery and everybody want to chime in without context, what oftentimes don't make, the issue that's at hand or the problem, whatever, it ain't gonna make it better. And oftentimes it makes the conditions harder to actually engage in transformation, for transformation to be on the other side. So that's coming up.
And we're going to talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
A little bit. Yeah, the internet is decidedly anti-context in terms of helping us create grounded assessments from which we can move. Mm-hmm. And then the only other one that's coming up for me, and then we'll keep it moving, but I know that also there's other feminist values that you all hold dear inside of your own communities or life or work. You're also welcome and invited to put those in the chat at this time. But I just think that there's something to me when I think about some of the study that I've done of past feminists and feminist movements, most of whom are not famous and many of whom's names we will never know, but around a combination of both courage and humility.
Ashe.
Where
it's not shit one more time for the folk in the back and the people who just tuned in. Them too. Say it again. Courage
and humility, everybody. That special alchemy and combination, right? That we are here to flex and build our courage, knowing that that is something that can also be a muscle that can be grown, and that we are also here for the team justice that we're also going to be talking about, not just for the shine or for our own egos. Or for our own developing our own social media following. So I just think that if we're out here just to get famous, we're often going to be led astray.
Thanks.
So those are a couple. I'm sure other people are putting genius things in the chat. We're technologically, we have issues, so we'll try to find those soon so we can see y'all's brilliance. But just wanted, for 2 more minutes, want to hear from you when you think about history, or even inside of our own separate and shared work together. When have we got it right? When have you been like, oh, we are living, or I have witnessed organizing happening inside of some of the best of our values? Where have we gotten it right, and where have we gotten it wrong? And I'll start. Give you a second.
Thank you.
I'm going to give 2, and then I'm going to kick it to you, and then we're going to keep it moving. But so we didn't say this earlier, but the place that Mary Hooks and I were joined together in an arranged marriage of sorts.
A feminist value.
A feminist arranged marriage.
That sounds so fucked up.
Was inside of Song Southerners on New Ground about a decade ago, right? So that is very much our key organization inside which we were able to serve in a variety of different roles. It is a 28-year-old or maybe 29-year-old LGBTQ multiracial Southern feminist organization. And one of the founders of Southerners on New Ground, Mandy Carter, talks a lot about are we thinking about inside of LGBTQ movements, inside of racial justice movements, and inside of feminist movements, are we thinking about justice, or are we thinking about just us? And I think about that all the time, because I also, as also a white person that has been trained to self-advocate and think that my needs are important often, I think it's really profoundly important for us as individuals, as well as inside of our broader organizing, to think about what our aims are. And if we're thinking about team justice and broad transformation of power and systems, or if we're just thinking about our own little individual slice of the pie. And so I think inside of thinking about an intersectional politic and practice, inside of feminist politic and practice, the best of our organizing traditions that are feminists are ones that are thinking about justice overall and not just us, narrowly defined as one sort of group or constituency. You got one more?
I'm thinking about I don't know why. Well, this was coming up, and this is historical memory that was passed on through Suzanne Farr and many others who at the time were inside of the anti-violence movement, and that decision around, do we lean into the crime bill?
Yep.
Do we actually, and folks who define safety as carceral measures to address gender-based violence and harm, versus those who were clear through their own feminist lens and their feminist lens understanding, rather be gender-based violence, rather it be, all the violence that the state engages us on, that the state was not going to be a meal ticket for preventing, interrupting, solving, addressing the root causes of gender-based violence. It ain't gonna change itself, right? And that split that happened with those who were like, hey, you're gonna rock with the system, and those who weren't, I think, and making that split, if you will, I think is one of the examples of like how, having to choose what we know to be true, and choosing a radical vision of abolition, of prison abolition, is an example of how feminist values were being embodied during that time. Yeah. And I think that, that eventually, ultimately, sets of folk begin to continue to build. And when folks who were engaged, like Beth Ritchie and others who were engaged in the struggle around anti-violence, and how they began to combine forces with other folks who were in some of these initial conversations with critical resistance, and those who were developing language around and understanding and framework around the prison industrial complex, and to be able to say, hey, we actually need to be in deeper because we have a shared vision, and so that piece doesn't get left out of the story. So that doesn't get left out of how gender-based violence is impacting our communities, because we bring in our whole selves. We know what our lives have experienced, and be able to bring that to bear inside of a conversation around abolishing the prison industrial complex, I think is also, just stands up for me in a particular way, because I feel like we're in a moment where we're talking about divest, invest, defund. We won't probably go down this rabbit hole a little bit more, where folks, it's decision-making time. Real talk. It's a decision-making time around, are we choosing our feminist values and leaning into transformation, hope, redemption, all the things? Or are we going to say, you know what, actually, let the police keep doing what they're doing, because this is what makes me feel good at night, versus actually having the courage to be able to step into something different, to struggle around what does systems inside of our own communities, our own families, our own villages look like that can address harm,
And to step into uncertainty.
Yeah.
Because we saw so much of our base, as well as so much of the country, be transformed by the uprisings across the country, sparked by the murder of George Floyd. And Breonna Taylor. And I think that to me, now we're in the moment of like many people's relationship to police was reconsidered, and people's were transformed politically, and we have many options of many roads to take. And shout out to Black Visions and all the organizing that's happening in Minneapolis. Like, there is amazing organizing that's moving, and to step into abolition at this time, and to step into the defund and the divest invest work also requires a step into uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I think for those of us that have a little bit more insulation from uncertainty in our own personal lives because of any number of sort of privileges or advantages, that feels real uncomfortable. And so I think that that's also the invitation for all of us in movement. The last thing that I want to say that I think is interesting, to your point, is just like how much more study we should do around the like anti-violence movement period in the history, right? And all of the different sort of deals that were brokered inside of that, inside of different sets of the movement, as well as like what happened with the Violence Against Women Act and other federal legislation starting in the 70s that did say, if you're going to be a shelter or if you're going to be a center that's doing anti-violence work and you want this federal money, you're going to have to call the cops.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, thinking about all of the different twists and turns, we have a lot to learn there. So let's keep it moving because we could run our mouths forever. We want to talk a little bit about, I want you to share a story about Mama Pat leading into the highway shutdown to connect some of the intergenerational lessons and possibilities that are all around us.
Yeah. So I think this is important to know. This is important to know because back in when the Olympics came to Atlanta and announced they were coming, the Cobb County, who had recently put out a ordinance saying essentially LGBTQ people weren't welcome here. And then our elders, Mama Pat and the crew, Lorraine, Fontana, and different ones, you know what I mean, who were here in Atlanta at the time, were like, wait a minute, y'all know all of them dykes is on that damn volleyball team. How y'all gonna try to get paid? Because we, you know, inside of this deal, as you just literally said, that we were not welcome there. And so there was a huge fight and campaign around Olympics out of Cobb in order to make sure that they didn't benefit from the suffering and also what it meant for them to have, you know, essentially drew that line in the sand around who was and who was not welcome in the Cobb.
Let me give one piece of context.
Go give us a little.
Okay, so Cobb County is like a county in Metro Atlanta.
Yeah.
It's like 20 minutes out. And they were lobbying to host some of these freaking events, be it the gay volleyball or the rowing or the decathlon. I don't know. Keep going.
Okay, decathlon.
I don't know.
However, so that as they were escalating their tactics, one of the things that they did was called for a highway slowdown. So Mama Pat and some comrades, they got together and they actually took the highway in cars. They had reporters in each car in case one of them got pulled over versus the other. And they literally, they slowed down traffic, you know, going 20, 30 miles an hour, whatever, and backed up traffic for miles and miles and miles. To the extent where, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mama Pat, if you watch it, drop it in the chat, I could be wrong.
Or text
They
us.
ended up writing a law saying about, you know, not like you can't be driving slow on the highway.
Yeah, no, the minimum speed.
Yeah. So she had told us this, right? And so fast forward circa October of 2014.
Yeah.
Song and many other.
Who? I mean, there's the people. You're not in that picture.
Look at that little. That's cute.
That's the highway shutdown.
And then came a swarm of other people.
Yeah.
And then
about that too.
So then, fast forward, Ferguson had put a call out for organizations to come, and one of the organizations who went and mobilized. So we took a crew up there, and in that space, that's where, you know, the big call that Ferguson was putting out was like, you know, this stuff is happening in your backyard. You know, this stuff is happening. Go turn up where you live at, right? And we were like, say less, you know what I mean? And so in that space, we begin to scheme about, and I talked about what Mama Patnam did, and those who were in Atlanta, who was in Ferguson, was like, all right, let's start scheming. So maybe a week and a half later, you know, late nights, a lot of cigarettes, whatever, and we begin to plot on how we would do that. However, because we didn't have enough cars, once we developed the plan, we didn't have enough cars, and everybody have enough cars like that, we ended up standing on the highway. But we were inspired by the resistance. What we saw as a radical act one that could interrupt the system, be able to, do interruption, but also call attention, not just for the murder of Mike Brown, but so many people, both here in Atlanta and nationally. And so we wanted to do our part to continue to escalate the tension that was felt all across the country, in addition to the smoke that we was, already given to the city of Atlanta. And so I just think there's something courageous about what Mama Patton was doing in the 90s that deeply inspired us to move in that way. That helped, and we could continue on with the story around how it eventually evolved into us establishing Free from Fear campaign and the Land Nobel. Woo, woo, woo. I mean, the story goes. But that's how I think the legacy. Another set. That's how the legacy of, inside of song and in other places, how legacy and intergenerational organizing and story sharing and passing along courage. And I remember Suzanne Farr telling me one time, she said, Mary, folks to edge of their fears, right? In order for folks to work that muscle like you was talking about, right? So, somebody is like, I'm scared to just get on the highway. All right, honey, then your road can just be to pass out the snacks on the side, If that is, get as close to the fire as you can until you build enough courage to take another step next time. So I'll stop there.
I love that. I mean, I think the other thing that's poignant to me is like, we read books, we go to panels, we got friends around, but like the story about the Olympics out of Cobb work, I think especially also because it was like LGBTQ and a lot of like LGBTQ Black women and like folks of color, like that history, like we didn't, like if we didn't know Mama Pat, like we wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
So I do think there's also something that's so profound to me about as I was saying earlier, the like rebuilding of the fabric and the figuring out how we can pass along and pass forth these stories that I feel like is so profound. And then the other thing that I just think is also profound about that moment in 2014 was it was like, y'all did the highway shutdown. And there's a lot more to say about that. And then literally, like the next day, there was highway shutdowns across the country.
Yeah.
So that's the other interesting thing about this time was it was like, but those folks don't know that tactic originated with the Black lesbian named Mama Pat, who told a Black lesbian named Mary Hooks.
Yeah.
Who then got to share that with the movement in this time. So there's just something powerful, not about fame, but about attribution and lineage and thinking about the different ways that things come to us.
That's good.
Okay. We want to talk a little bit about Mitch Fest.
Go get your auntie to smoke, honey. Give it.
And the 1993 march, if we can fit it in.
We got a few minutes before Q&A.
Yeah, tell me when
we got 10 minutes.
Okay, 10 minutes. I'm going to keep this really fast. But essentially, I never got to go to Mitch Fest.
I was so looking forward to it.
You didn't get to go to Mitch Fest. We will say that one of our many things that we've invented collectively with many other brilliant people inside of song was something called Gaycation, that in some ways is like a mini pro-Black, pro-trans, rowdy version of Mitch Fest. But essentially, Mitch Fest was an annual gathering of tens of thousands of women and lesbians and dykes that happened in Michigan for coming out of the sort of second wave, starting in the 70s. And it actually sunsetted a number of years ago. And we have many loved ones that made annual pilgrimages there. And essentially, in a lot of ways, so many of our feminist values were embodied in that space. It was intergenerational. I mean, it was very, very white, but it was cross-class. It was multiracial in some ways. And they cooked all of their own meals. They took care of each other. They stewarded the land. They had their own healthcare, all of this different infrastructure that they built and then disassembled every year. And then all this beautiful music, culture, and art. But essentially what happened was the organizers of Mitch Fest, after sort of a decade of debate and exclusion of the trans community, ended up deciding to sunset the entire sort of feminist and womanist institution because of the fear and the refusal to engage in changing the policies to make them inclusive, welcoming, and loving towards our trans sisters, right? And so when I think about some of our feminist roots, I think that this story brings up a lot for me. One, I'm mad because I didn't get to go. We didn't get to go. And so it's not something that so many of our kids and loved ones also get to experience and learn how to do this at scale. The infrastructure that they were able to build, like tens of thousands, like we can barely sometimes cook a meal for 10 or 100, much less 10,000, you know, like we have stuff to learn from these lesbians. But literally the fact that for different women and many of these organizers being white and being lesbians, that the sort of fear and loathing of trans people and the obsession with genitalia, similar to the right wing, prohibited our collective ability to transform that space into one that actually meets the needs of our beautiful communities, knowing that the gender is a constellation of which there are infinite numbers of genders, and that we are lucky and privileged to be able to be in a time where we can be building and loving on gender nonconforming people, trans people, non-binary people, and all of our different folks. So there's just a lot of loss that I have around also specifically the sort of rigidity and the refusal to investigate, the refusal to grow, the refusal to change. And I'm a survivor. You're like, a lot of us are survivors. And that doesn't mean that a body part is the enemy. What it means is that patriarchy and misogyny are the enemy. And so how do we actually reorient inside of our own movements so that we can not surrender so much ground and so much possibility because of our own internal inhibitions and infighting. And okay, go ahead and then do 2 minutes on struggle ceremony.
Dang, time. I just want to, I ain't gonna finish up because you said
that's it.
I just want to reinforce that their inability to change, to not change their heart, to not change their mind, to not be curious, to not like, and real talk, in as much as we like pissed that we couldn't go and we couldn't learn or whatever, when an institution, organization like that refused, like, and I'm actually like, you know what? If you couldn't do that, that was the only, real talk, that was the only decision you could have made, because you would have continued to perpetuate more harm, more damage, more divisiveness, you know what I mean? That, you know, probably would have, still have implications on stuff that folks are trying to do today. And so, yeah.
Okay, I have one more thing to say.
Fuck them. They could send us the notes, though. Like, but you know what I mean? Like, put in a little something. If one of y'all on here, at least you owe us the movement. You know what I mean? How did y'all fucking do that shit?
We want to learn.
But other than that, nothing else to offer.
And I think that the reason why this example was like sitting on my heart when prepping for this is because I think it does also exemplify the fact that, like, we know that inside of our various feminist traditions, like, there are huge rifts and there is huge histories and current realities of betrayal.
Oh, yeah.
And so much of that actually falls along lines around class and race and sexuality and even gender. So I think that this also exemplified to me the reality. I think about this a lot for myself as a white lesbian, just the fact that, like, as a white woman, so much of my own training inside of whiteness has also been to callous my heart, to not feel, and to insulate myself, to be able to justify so much that is done structurally in my name, even though not at my are not making the decisions.
Mm.
And so I think a lot about the Mitch Fest example because it also exemplifies the sort of the betrayal of white women. That we've made so many betrayals of Black women, of undocumented women, of women of color, as well as upper class women have betrayed working class women.
Hell yeah.
Right. So there's all of these different betrayals, and so this is just one example that is also about trans exclusionary feminists also betraying trans folks. Right. And so I just think that that's a reality, and part of our hunger for transformation is also to understand our roots, but to also not be held hostage by that.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, well, the only thing I can do as a white lesbian is sit on my hands and wait for Mary Hooks to tell me what to do.
Get the fuck out of here.
Right, but that also often is the message.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about for 3 minutes.
Struggle ceremony.
Yeah, tell them about that.
Yeah. So Kate and I, inside of Gaycation, we were at that time like doing a lot of chapter support and leadership development and campaign development inside of Song, whatever. So, but when we were experiencing and inside of, folks had beef with us. Folks had beef that they were grappling with inside their chapters, whatever. And we created a process in which we got from that poem. We started calling it the poem that Monse had read. Shout out to Monse for that beautiful poem. If you won't hear, hey boo. Around how struggle is ceremony, and we would pitch a tent, put some chairs out, and we will hold process, and we'll hold space for people to be able to say, one, if you got beef with somebody and they're here, go talk to them. Go have a one-on-one. As always, the first step to addressing harm, conflict, whatever. Do the one-on-one, right? And sometimes that shit don't work, and you gotta like bring some other flank, and hence that's what we came in. And so we had like folks would sign up, and essentially I think we would kind of be like, all right, there was always the investigation would come, yeah. So folks be able to, hey, you tell your truth, and sometimes I think like the first hit dog or holler, that's the wrong one. The loudest one, whoever make the loudest noise, whatever. And we wanted to make sure that we created an opportunity for there to just be righteous truth telling, because we know there are multiple truths always moving, right? And then we would invite people to say, to grapple with what they heard, and then we would say, then folks will have to gap. What are you willing to give up, or will you want to let go of?
What do you want to ask and offer?
Ask and offer. And that exchange of like, how do we create and rebuild, be on a path of, if it hadn't existed, a path to trust. And that being something that, we saw as sacred in order to be able to fortify, again, the fabric of our relationships, to be able to make sure that, when issues come up, that we don't see it as like, oh no, I got a problem with somebody, but the invitation to be in struggle with people when the outcome and desire and will is transformation, and to like, we stronger together. Why wouldn't we want to resolve this in order to be able to, see it as generative when it's healthy, when it's constructive, and when folks are actually like, trying to do something bigger than themselves and beyond the conflict. And I don't want to minimize conflict and harm and all the shitty shit sometimes that we do to each other. You know what I mean? But I do think that there is a container, and that was one that we would hold. I forget how many years we did it. Don't matter. We did it multiple years. But we hope that even in sharing knits, that folks would, think about the ways in which we hold the sacredness of how we struggle for the sake of collective unity, and not just, again, to be right, or to make sure I got my point across, or to make sure I got credit, or to make sure all that shit don't fucking matter when it's all said and done. You know what I mean? The transformation is what we're after. Ourselves, each other, our world.
Okay, y'all, I know y'all talking a lot about what we were just talking about, but we do want to make sure that folks are present. You can come back to some of that after. But the reason why we wanted to end with this little story about the struggle of ceremony, and we could talk about that for a long time, is because we are in the trenches. Mary's on assignment at Movement for Black Lives. I'm on my assignment with you all at Women's March. And we just want to note and name and invite all of us to think about how we can actually, in real time, engage questions of conflict and transformation more directly, more compassionately, and more persistently. Because we are seeing inside of our different groups, inside of movement across organizations, you know, a certain level of brittleness and hostility and assumptions that people are making about each other.
Oh, yeah.
And we know that the fabric is broken. We know that, right? And for those of us that are feminists, right, and those of us that are inside of movement, we want to take up our collective assignment to do some repair, right? And to question and investigate our assumptions and understanding when conflict inevitably arises, right? All day I've been like, they call it a struggle for a reason, everybody. It's a struggle. And our work is our game, you know? That we hold two. One, that it's a struggle out here in this time. Of course, we're totally whacked out. Where we look at the time that we're living in. And two, we can build trust through shared work.
Yes.
Right? We're a testament to that. So many of us are a testament to that we can't, because so much is broken, we can't assume that we're going to trust each other originally.
Right.
Or immediately, but that we can over time build trust, build a path to trust, and build trust through shared work. And that also is a way that we can be proactive, is by being diligent in our desire to make change. And let me tell you, being an organizer, it sure is amazing, and it's not always glossy, everybody.
Hell no.
It's pretty rugged. But we get to be part of Team Justice, and that's what we're here for.
There you go.
Goodbye, everybody.
All right.
We'll see you soon. Keep organizing. The best chance we got.
Best thing we got.
Best thing we got, everybody.
Good night.